Okay. Oops, get this going. So tests are all graded. If you've got any more, please let me know. Any more business career things? By the way, this is all old school. This is all from New Orleans. We actually had a day off from Mardi Gras in Mississippi and Louisiana. There were state holidays because couldn't do any work anyway. It's interesting. Mardi Gras comes from carnival means carnival. It means without meat. And so the whole thing about Mardi Gras came from the 40 days of Lent, which started in Europe. And the whole point of the 40 days of Lent was that you would fast or you would abstain from eating meat for the entire 40 days. And during that time, of course, if you had any meat before, you couldn't eat it. So Ash Wednesday would start the Lent season. And so Fat Tuesday was the day that you basically used up all your wine and all your meat. And that's how Mardi Gras became a holiday. Carnival, without meat. That's exactly what it means. And it's interesting because in New Orleans and in Mobile, you have what's considered the traditional urban kinds of Mardi Gras, the beads and the floats. And there was a huge influence from Jamaica and those other locations. And it's more of a Creole kind of celebration, whereas in Louisiana, in the rural areas, it's more of a European flavor. So it's actually more of a Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries. Very different in the way that they are, but both good times. Yeah, I would put it on your bucket list one time, believe me. And I did most of my Mardi Gras in the 70s, and there's no pictures, thank God. Anyway. All right, so let's finish up. We're going to finish up early. Short days. So anyway, let us go on. So wholesaling strategies. Oh, by the way, grades are all posted. As I said, just claim it again. So what is the enduring strategies of wholesale, and where are the pressures are now, and where is ultimately going to be the future? Well, the first thing that we need to understand about wholesaling now and in the future is that there are three great challenges to wholesaling. And yes, this is a essay question. Okay. Wholesaling faces three great challenges that manufacturers and customers have a very troubling tendency to underestimate the pressures that they're under. And so these are the challenges. The first is to do the job correctly and understand that wholesaling generally, as a rule of thumb, is massive consolidations of requirements from both manufacturers and their clients, who are usually retailers. Do the job correctly. The next is to apply or give maximum service in the transaction itself, and that's to do the job effectively. And then finally, once again, because there's only two ways to make money, and that's either to increase revenue or to reduce cost, and that's to do the job efficiently with as low a cost as we possibly can. And these are invisible generally to the buyers and to the manufacturers, because like everything, like a duck's paddling feet underwater, all of these things happen out of the view of both the upstream and the downstream partners. And so these are the three great challenges: to do the job correctly, to do the job effectively, and to do the job efficiently. All three of those. And so a way to get an understanding of what the wholesaling world has been and how it has changed over the centuries is a good one to look at is the understanding of the wholesale industry of pharmaceuticals and its transition from being a very close ordered thing with just a few people to large numbers, what ultimately required it to split out, branch out, and specialize in order to become effective. So, wholesale drug trade back into the mid 1700s was basically the physician and their personal medications that they used in treating patients. Now, we're not talking about a lot of things. The great century for medical progress happened around the 1800s. And so we're talking about a time when there were certain things that you could help to reduce some things. Some things go on forever, like oil of cloves as an effective kind of cure for toothache. You can still find that. But a lot of these things were based around the physicians and what they used and performed. So, pharmaceutical industry in the United States, how were they able to do it? Well, they did what wholesalers do now. The physicians, usually we're talking about clustered around New England and the American colonies, would all get together and choose one physician. That one physician would consolidate all of their orders together, just like retailers do with wholesalers, and that one physician would take all the money and they would sail to Europe. The physician would get to Europe, buy the pharmaceuticals, turn around, and then come back and distribute those goods to his partners. Now, he wasn't doing it out of the kindness of his heart, he was usually compensated for his expenses along the way. These are the exact same functions as they're performed as we know them now. So fast forward into the 1800s, you saw not only the advent of modern medicine, but you're also seeing the saddest thing of all is that you have also the concentration of great wars at the same time. And one of those tragedies, of course, is that when wars come along, certain things breed and go faster, like technology and medicine as well. So you started to see a gradual growth in the industry of medicines. You started to see where you actually had things such as, oh my gosh, where am I going? Morphines and other medications like laughing gas, which allowed surgeries to happen. And just imagine what was going on in that time. Medications and medicines became so big that doctors themselves could not spare the time and effort to know all of those things. And so pharmaceuticals became its own industry. And so as an industry itself, you not only had them open to doctors, but you also had them open to retail as well. And so what happens is that the pharmaceuticals arise independent of physicians. And what happens also about the same time is that you see the early birth of wholesaling systems. Generally, they tend to be local. They tend to be geographical in nature because it is easier and more efficient to know the individuals who are placing the orders. And so this is the modern growth of the wholesale industry. You also saw, along with pharmacies putting together goods for doctors to buy, but then you also saw the retail trade as well, which started to lend itself to other things along with health aids, and health aids gravitated to beauty aids. And so what we're seeing now is we're seeing the advent, the growth of the modern pharmaceutical industry and the modern pharmacy as well. You started to also see that the pharmacies started to carry other goods besides his health and beauty. Then you started to see them start to open lunch counters. Lunch counters gravitated to drinks. Drinks, especially in the South, gravitated to sodas and those places were unique because they were carbonated and it required special equipment to be able to do it. And then they first bottling of carbonated beverages was ultimately around in the 1890s. and see the modern soft drink era as it comes. Thing in the United States, all of the major sodas that we know of came from the South. Coke came from Atlanta. Bart's Root Beer came from Biloxi in New Orleans, two brothers. Cher Wine came from here. Mountain Dew came from Tennessee. RC Cola came from South Carolina, all from the South. Interesting. Anyway, so you have this massive industry that has been created. You start to find wholesaling taking over. And then all of a sudden, when you start to lean into the 70s, the number of drug wholesalers dropped from 147 firms around the United States down to 53. And now I think it's down to 5 firms would have like 80% of the national market. So what was the thing that did this basic enormous change? It came down to a wave of consolidation, especially because of what is required to be successful in the wholesale industry. Remember, I said that wholesalers do massive amounts of movement of goods back and forth. The official term is called picking. And so think of a labor-intensive industry. Let's look at pharmacies. Just imagine looking in the back of your local pharmacy in a Walgreens. Look at all of the medications there. Multiply that by 4,000, and that's just the number of Walgreens. And then, in essence, quadruple that number to the total number of pharmacies in the United States. And then just to consider the enormous amount of effort it takes just to pull a number of medications just for one thing. The wholesale industry demanded that economies of scale come along and be able to fix their central issue, which is in distribution and picking. And lo and behold, it came along and it succeeded. Now, it did not reduce the number of people who were working in the wholesale industry. There's plenty of room there. But what it ultimately did was the economies of scale took over. The technology took over for automatic machines to do the automatic picking. And then finally, with all of the rest of that, you had the vast scales that make wholesaling so successful. And so this is how wholesaling industry as a whole came about. As I talked about before, wholesalers do some very special things for their retailers. They gather all of that information. They gather the needs of the mom and pop's convenience stores or the local drug pharmacies. They help to use technology to be able to process that and to help facilitate transactions. They add value by having this enormous successful infrastructure that exploits the economies of scale. And along with that is they have the ability to absorb the risk that goes into it as well. It helps to spread risk, especially among retailers who do not have the resources to be able to perform the gigantic functions that they do. For B2B buyers, wholesalers do have many of the functions that traditionally constitute manufacturing, and they do the goods they sell. So back in the 80s, I've talked about this before. I worked for a computer store. I was a manager there, and we decided we did not want to sell Hewlett-Packard personal computers again. And so we were trying to consider where our future is. Well, about this time, you started to see kit bashing coming in for us. You started to see where producers like Asus, Electech, and several of the other groups came along and started producing their own motherboards. And so just as you know, if you're into the technology, you trick out your work, you jailbreak your systems, you know, you maximize your gaming. Well, that's kind of what we were doing with PCs. And so what we look for motherboards that we felt were successful, along with the hard drives and everything else. We found a wholesaler in Houston that would take our motherboards, put the motherboards in the cases themselves. And if anybody has ever known anything, there's a nightmare if you don't line up a case correctly and it can short up against the case and you've got yourself a whole mess. They did that for us. We put in our own hard drives, our own floppy disk drives, such a thing did exist, compact disk drives, and we put in our own graphics cards, and we would trick out our systems. What our wholesaler did for us is they would take those pieces, put them together for us, and for just a 10% added price, would do a 200-hour burn-in so that those machines that we knew when we got them were right from the very beginning. And believe me, you have no idea just how comforting that is. I bought a machine. I use vMix and I do live video broadcasting with the company I have. And they did everything that these people would do, and they would burn the whole system in and put it all together for me for $80. And that was so comforting to know that they did all of that for me. And so this is a wholesaler, and this is what a wholesaler does. They transform the goods they sell. They created a service and added value to what they sold to us, ultimately successful in the long run. So wholesaling, because economies of scale are so valuable, there's a continual push to basically consolidate. Manufacturers have to understand that, retailers do as well. The manufacturer point of view can be sometimes very, very myopic, okay? So I don't want you to worry about too much about wholesaling strategies in emerging economies. Just understand this, and this is part of the same lesson. Successful wholesaling tends to be local and rarely global. And of course, there's a history of Africa being taken advantage of by colonizers. And so what you hope to do is successful wholesaling is done at the local level. And that's what this part of the chapter is about, but you don't have to worry about that for the test, okay? So if I'm a retailer and I am looking at what's happening with wholesaling, I have a different opinion about it if I'm a manufacturer who are looking for someone to be able to distribute their products. Wholesalers are large, they're sophisticated, they're capital intensive, they invest in high technology that helps make, because the key bottom line to a wholesaler is as much as his sales, but how much they can control their cost. You will even find downstream partners, multi-unit retailers, sizable purchasing groups that are demanding those costs that we talked about in retail. They are demanding some cost concessions from their wholesalers and the manufacturers. And the only way that they can reduce the cost, the wholesaler can, is by reducing their own. And so acquisition becomes a planned goal, whether they wish to or not. And so how does the manufacturer choose which of the wholesalers to work with when consolidation seems to be an inevitable? So there's a couple of ways to do it. One of them is to try to identify the winners. So who are the winners? The ones that are really good at acquisition and consolidation. The first is to look at catalyst firms. When Bob Iger bought Disney, his way that he was going to achieve expansion with Disney was to buy. Disney was a catalyst firm that triggers consolidation by rapidly acquiring. And so Disney went out and bought ESPN, which owned ABC, which bought Marvel, then bought Lucasfilms. Then they bought, Pixar. And each one of those was a purchase. Bob Iger's success is not in creation, but in consolidation. You might also look for the wholesalers that have, in essence, gone past the initial cycle, that are still surviving and still succeeding, because when it's survival of the fittest, if there's a wholesaler out there that is still around, that is separate and unique, there's a certain advantage to that and a strength that that particular corporation has. First mover is not necessarily advantages. The first movers are generally out there at the beginning, but generally it's whoever is there at the end that has the most success. Extreme specialists that are really tuned to the conditions that are happening in their particular industry, they're the ones who are likely to prevail under this consolidation. We're going through a huge wave of AI right now. And when NVIDIA is able to actually rent their chips out now, those individuals who understand this and have an intimate, detailed knowledge, because AI transcends any of the current technology corporations. Or you could be an extreme generalist. So a generalist is a corporation that owns just a little bit of everything. Standard Office Supply is one of those. Generalists also have the advantage of they don't live within an industry that may be open for recessions. They tend to have successes and failures, and it all bottoms out. By the way, just a tip. If any of you ever get into munis, mutual funds, get into a mutual fund that's indexed to the S&P 500. It outperforms over the long run any specialized unique stock there is. All you have to do is look at 30-year trends of S&P 500s. And why? Because they maintain at least 16 to 20 unique industries, and they're able to maximize with wide variation over a series of years. Wish I'd have done it. Could have, but I didn't. So you can invest in fragmentation if you're worried about consolidation in your industry, and focus on just a niche. Outdoor equipment for mountainous regions would be an example of the fragmentation, just a very narrow market. Or you can vertically integrate your entire system. Say, I do not want to be a very narrow square peg in a round hole. I want to be able to do everything myself. And this is one of the reasons why we would vertically integrate. And then finally, to attract a good wholesaler, I might just do something like increase my own ability to offer benefits, such as investing in a strong brand name. This is what Asus did. This is also what Lenovo did. They were equipment manufacturers, and they came out with strong brand names, which made them worthy for purchasing themselves. And so these are kind of the ways, if I am a wholesaler, if I'm a manufacturer, to consider how to be able to manage the consolidation wave, which is inevitable in wholesale, especially physical goods, all right? So remember, your wholesalers tend to do the work of manufacturers, but they also do custom fitting, and they are the epitome of service. So what are the trends in wholesaling, and where is the future going along with consolidation? Well, with all the other things, wholesalers will be large, but very seldom global. We do have reduced cross-border shipping, following trade barriers. They do encourage expansion, but the very nature of wholesaling, which is a long-term commitment to retailers, will tend to be local rather than global. And so you will see, like a bottling company in Tennessee that has a dedicated number of retailers who work with them, and they're very happy with that service, because quasi-relational governance is more important than just a single price. They tend to not be global. It's as simple as that. One other item I just want to mention briefly before we leave is the rise of what's known as the reverse auction. So the reverse auction, this happens online. You see them a lot more now. A reverse auction will be a request from a given vendor, for a purchase of goods. And how the reverse auction acts is someone will say, I need to purchase 1 million cans of such and such. And what happens is one of the manufacturers or the wholesalers will come along and they'll say, I'll do that whole thing for $100,000. And then another wholesaler will come along and say, no, I'll do it for $90,000. There's a show called Shipping Wars, and Shipping Wars is very similar to this in that they would bid for a given service. So they would move this particular out of whatever, and it has to be moved across the United States in a given time frame. And what would happen is that the hot shots, as we talked about on Tuesday, independent distributors or contractors would come along and say, I can do that job for $6,000. Then another shipping person come along and say, I'll do it for $5,500. Next person comes along, I'll say, I'll do it for $5,200. This is what a reverse auction is. It is the bid or a request for work. And the multiple individuals out there are bidding for the lowest possible price, okay? The problem with reverse auctions is it's antithetical to long-term relationships. Having said that, with technology being what it is, and, individual, bright ideas, the ability to generate breakthroughs in performance are always there to create new ideas. The pressure to reduce costs can many times lead to very exotic and unique solutions, ones that we ultimately carry to this day. And some of them are really good, all right? So where there is the difficulty of reducing prices to the point of reducing relationships, there's always the opening and the opportunity to find ways of achieving those goods at a lower cost at an increased performance. All right. So we're done. We've ended chapter 7. Position papers Tuesday. We'll start next week on franchising, which is one of my favorite things. And we're moving towards a test probably in 2 weeks from this Thursday on chapters 6, 7, 8, and a little piece of 9. All righty. You have a good day.